All right, first rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 offseason fantasy football preview for the Tennessee Titans. And general rules of thumb when it comes to fantasy football are just guidelines. I do like to follow them. They will influence what I do usually, like if I'm comparing two guys together. So those ages do matter at certain points. Again, it's all about price when it comes down to certain things, like the road for guys to be fantasy relevant does matter to me. Sometimes when it comes down to draft day, I just have to trust my gut and go like, hey, I don't care what my league mates think. This guy's got a chance to win me a league. When I talk about like Will Levis in this case, this would be another reason why I would tend to punt the quarterback position this year. One of these guys, at the very least, at the bottom of the draft, is going to have the ability to be a league winner. And I look at this where we can guess that maybe a JJ McCarthy, Daniel Jones, Drake May, Bo Penix, like somebody is going to break out this year, even if it's a Sam Darnold. Him being the quarterback for the Vikings, like spending capital on a guy who is relatively flawed in a way to not win me a league is maybe not the best way to attack drafts. Even though, like when we talk about Will Levis, the chances of him hitting the high end, his ceiling of ranges of outcomes may be small. It's better to maybe expect that there's a chance that I can find that guy, like a Kyron Williams, Puka. Those guys may be rare. They don't happen very often, but expect that I can find those guys instead of reaching on a guy that is going to be less than a punt when it comes to winning my league. That's what I look at this stuff when I talk about like my draft strategy, how I'm going to attack the draft. I don't like trying to draft guys that have limited upside to just punt, and then I have to figure out how to deal with them on my roster as the season goes on. There will be points where like DeAndre Hopkins is going to have a certain amount of value. To me, on a roster going like I've built my team a certain way. I'm just not going to overthink my wide receiver 3, my wide receiver or my flex position, something along those lines. Or it's going to be really nice to have that guy during bye weeks, something along those lines. But in general, those are guys that I don't want on my roster. So some of the upside guys like your Will Levises, your Chigs, and your Calvin Ridleys, I really do like, especially when it comes to value shopping on this one. So let's get into this a little bit. News and notes. Trevor Lawrence, he signs a 5-year, $275 million contract. Not all that fantasy relevant right now in and of itself, but it did happen today. The other news that is a little bit more fantasy relevant, especially because we're going to talk about Chig here in a second, is Juwan Johnson had foot surgery. He is going to be out indefinitely. Right now, I only moved him down a couple slots. Chig moved up, but in general, if this lingers into camp, he's just going to be off the board in general. Right now, he would be a fringe guy that should be drafted in all leagues based off the road or the story that we would tell about having the ability to be the number 2 in his offense down there in New Orleans. All right, moving on. Not going to really care about what the Titans did last year on offense or defense. Mike Vrabel gets fired. Bringing in a new head coach. In this case, it's going to be Brian Callahan. He was the offensive coordinator for the Bengals. So we're going to be talking a lot about like the Bengals pieces today. And then they also went out and they brought in Nick Holtz, who was the passing game coordinator for the Jaguars. And that's a little interesting because Calvin Ridley signs a 4-year, $92 million deal coming over from the Jaguars to be what would project to be the number 1 for the Titans this year. All right. The other thing, when I would look at the Titans with that expectation, they're going to be a higher volume passing offense. And again, this could go both ways. I would generally think of them having about 550 pass attempts on the season. That's going to be about middle of the road. Again, it's not just about how many attempts they have. It's about the efficiency. We could get a very efficient 49ers team, lowest pass attempts in the league, or we can get a very inefficient Washington Redskins team that did 636. So again, not going to matter. Just going to put them in the middle of the road and say, they're going to be very hard to predict on a week-to-week basis with Will Levis. I'm going to guess, and this is why I have this pulled up when we get to the quarterback room. You may be looking at like Joe Flacco with rushing upside this year when it comes to Will Levis. Last year, Joe Flacco finished with the Browns, the highest neutral passer rate in the league, where he's thrown about 40 times a game. And it doesn't really matter if it's going to the opponent or it's going to your guy. If he's going to do 20 points a game and has the ability to score a couple rushing touchdowns, he's going to be a league winner. And that's all we have to really talk about when it comes to Will Levis this year. So he is my quarterback 20, and that's going to be primarily based off the chance that he can win a league based off that higher volume passing offense with the ability to call his own number in the red zone. He is going quarterback 24 on Fantasy Pros, 153 on Underdog. And remember, Underdog is a best ball league with a wide receiver meta. Just trying to get an idea how everybody values these guys. Will Levis is going quarterback 24 with an ADP of 181 overall. And then on ESPN, all the way down here at 267, quarterback 28, which I find really interesting because they have Calvin Ridley at wide receiver 29, 48 overall, and DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver 33, 57 overall. So they must be expecting that Will Levis is going to do something good in the passing game, even if he's a turnover machine, which I don't think is going to be a very unfair projection of what Will Levis is likely to be this year overall. In college, and this is one of the things that makes Will Levis a little bit exciting from a fantasy perspective, was the goal line fullback for Penn State when he was there, and then he had 9 rushing touchdowns in 2021 with the Kentucky Wildcats. The other thing in 2022, when those numbers went down, he was a little nicked up. So I'm still going to expect that you're going to have the possibility for the ceiling being like this Joe Burrow 2022 season where he did 4,500 yards passing, 36 passing touchdowns to go along with 5 rushing touchdowns, 259. That's probably the ceiling. The other guys that I would talk about this, and I would pull this one up right here when we talk about like the quarterbacks, is you're going to have a few other guys that he theoretically could end up being this year on the low end. And I'll just get it out of the way. Like you're probably looking at a Sam Howell type of season where like 4,000 yards passing, 21 touchdowns to go along with 21 interceptions, 263 rushing and 5 rushing touchdowns. I do think that there's going to be a lot of rushing touchdowns for Will Levis because of Tony Pollard in this offense. And then the other guys that we'd be looking at on my notes are Baker May is another guy. Baker May wasn't necessarily fantasy relevant until the injuries started happening. He did 4,000 yards passing, 28 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 163 rushing, 1 touchdown. That did about 16 points a game. And remember, like your scoring settings and my scoring settings, that's just not going to do it for you outside of like a streamer or replacement level guy, bye weeks. The other guys that we'd be looking at, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, is Trevor Lawrence, this 4,000 yards passing, 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. Again, if Will Levis is not quite as error prone, 339, 4 touchdowns, still 16.4 points a game, not going to win you a league. Jordan Love is when we start getting into this. So Jordan Love was a league winner, 4,100 yards passing, 32 touchdowns, 11 interceptions to go with 247 rushing, 4 touchdowns on the ground. That would make Will Levis the league winner at that point, 18.8 points a game, if you're getting this year's Jordan Love undrafted. And again, more than likely outside of your league, and remember, know your league's personality. If everybody's going to be drafting all the players that have league winning upside, yeah, you're probably going to have to knife fight for Will Levis before week 1. If that's not how your league personality is, and I know there's a lot of leagues out there that still do like 1 quarterbacks and no one else drafts more than 1, probably going to be like looking at him being week 1 priority if we're getting this ridiculous high volume passing offense like Joe Flacco did with a little bit of rushing upside with Will Levis. So that's what I'd be looking at. And then the high end of ranges of the outcomes, if we'd be looking at it, would be this Dak Prescott type of season, 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns, probably going to go over on the 9 interceptions, but another 242 and 2 touchdowns. So like that would be the range of outcomes for Will Levis. And that's why definitely would be thinking about throwing that like last round dart at that range of outcomes to win me a league at that point. That would be sub elite if you get Dak Prescott relative to last year with Josh Allen and those 15 rushing touchdowns that he did. A couple other things is Mason Rudolph. He's going to be the backup quarterback. He comes over from the Steelers. Not going to be too excited if he's the starter when it comes to the toys. Malik Willis would have a little bit more interest with the Nimbly Bimbly if he takes over down the line. You're looking at Mason Rudolph like, yeah, he's not bad. He's just not going to give you what your expectation would be with the guys in this offense. If you're expecting Will Levis just throwing the football 40 times a game, probably not going to be the strength of Mason Rudolph in that one. Running back room, I have Tony Pollard, running back 27. I split him and Tajay Spears. Tajay Spears is running back 28. I am expecting this to be 100% 50-50 backfield when it comes to these two guys. So in this case, Tony Pollard, he's going running back 25 on Fantasy Pro, 75 overall. Tajay Spears is going running back 35, 106 overall. On Underdog, Tajay Spears is going running back 34, 112.7. Tony Pollard is going running back 29, 99.5. And over here on ESPN, they are stacked back to back. Tajay Spears running back 29, Tony Pollard running back 30, 97 and 98 overall in this one. So Tony Pollard, he did a 3-year, $21.75 million contract with $10.49 million guaranteed. And in this case, the out is going to be after 2025. He is going to be he just turned 27 this year, so he's over the first age apex. When we talk about these age apexes for running backs, there's two of them. There's the top at 26. They can still be productive for 27 and 28. The other thing is a lot of people don't generally think it's age. They think touches, and he was not used a lot when he was with the Cowboys. I would pick Tony Pollard out of the two guys because of the money that they spent on him to be the guy that's more valuable. But, and there's always a but to everything, I generally don't think he's going to be the goal line back. And the two things that we need to happen for these two guys are going to be passing work, which I think both of them are going to get, and goal line work. Now, 4th round draft pick Hassan Haskins, that was 2022 4th round draft pick. He is back this year. He was quote unquote on IR with an unknown injury. There was domestic violence stuff going on there. He was on the commissioner's exempt list last year. Him or undrafted free agent Dylan Johnson out of Washington, they're both going to be like that grinder type back, that hammer. If either one of these guys ends up being the goal line running back over Pollard and Spears, like that's going to cut any true fantasy value for Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears having the ability to quote unquote win leagues in this one. And I bring this up with Tony Pollard is last year with the Cowboys, he was 23 overall when it came to red zone efficiency, 57 rush attempts, which was like second in the league, only 4 rushing touchdowns. He had another 11 targets in the red zone, didn't convert any of those into touchdowns. So either that was the ankle injury, that was the offense, or he got lucky, or he's really bad when it comes to getting the football in the end zone. So that's why I would bring it up between Will Levis being the goal line fullback, these two hammers that theoretically could make the roster, one of the two of them on Hoskins or Johnson. I don't necessarily think that it's going to be Tajay Spears as the hammer, the goal line guy. But again, if we're trying to guess usage, I would guess first to Pollard. I don't think Tajay Spears is going to be the goal line guy in this offense. That's why I would say if there's a guy to own, it's going to be Pollard out of the bunch. I'm generally not interested in any of these guys other than certain builds where I'm going to bring in like a low-end RB2, and we're going to be thinking about like Najee and Jaylen Warren last year, something along those two guys. I did have this pulled up when it came to the running back room. Even if it's a lower volume rushing offense, and this is the bottom of the league, both these guys can have relatively like 700 or 800 yards rushing in a split backfield. And as long as they're getting enough receiving work, and both Pollard and Spears are receiving backs, they can return on that low-level RB2 type investment. So in those particular builds, like those zero running back builds or those hero running back builds, like you would be able to have one or both of those guys fill out your lineup. I do think there's just enough there to theoretically be able to do it that way. And again, remember in your drafts, you're not drafting lineups, you're drafting rosters. So there is enough interest with Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears that I could kick the can down the road, especially in these like fantasy pros league where you're looking at Tajay Spears going like 106 overall. Now, the problem that I'm going to have with like your Tajay Spears more so than Tony Pollard, if I'm just kicking this down the line, is even on my ESPN leagues, this would be the range that if I'm not attacking Ladd McConkey or Brian Thomas, and I'm really big on both those guys, this would be the range that I would be going up and getting these guys. So I just don't know how many shares of Spears or Pollard that I would be getting in any leagues. Regardless of where they're going, I think there's other guys that have league-winning upside that are going to be going around them. And in fantasy pros, where Tajay Spears or Tony Pollard goes 75 overall, this would be like where I would be looking to go up and get your Kyle Pittses, something along those lines to have Tony Pollard follow me. I do think these are good, solid picks. And if you want to punt at the position to take these guys, yeah, I'd go ahead and do it because they do both project to be those receiving backs in this offense. All right. Wide receiver room, Calvin Ridley, he's going to be my wide receiver 27. And that's primarily because, I do think there's league winning upside. The guy that could be the number one attached to a higher volume passing offense is going to have a lot of value. And he's going outside the range where he could finish as a top 10 wide receiver overall. On Fantasy Pros, he's going wide receiver 33, 69. On ESPN, he's going wide receiver 25, 48 overall, which I think is a little too pricey, even though that's about where I think he should be going. And then on Underdog, he's going wide receiver 36 with an ADP of 61.7. He does turn 30 in December. If you're into that thing, we're going to be talking about wide receiver ages. Guys, wide receivers can be productive. They're age 30 and 31 season. And then depending on usage and how they play out, this is Larry Fitz. If you remember Larry Fitzgerald from the Cardinals, he got moved primarily to the slot later on in his career. 32, 33, 34. You're looking at the 1,200, 1,000, 1,100 yard seasons to go along with 9 and 6 and 6 as a receiver playing mostly the slot. The other guy to be looking at, especially when we're talking here in a second about DeAndre Hopkins, is Adam Thielen last year doing that 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns, 103 receptions. So depending on how they utilize these two guys, they can still be very fantasy valuable. The guy that I'd be looking at is Calvin Ridley to be a top 10 wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins, he is all the way down at my wide receiver 42. And that's going to be because I don't know how he wins me a league. And that age apex, he's way over that age apex. He's wide receiver 36 on Fantasy Pros, 79 overall. On Underdog, he's going wide receiver 43 with an ADP of 72.7. And then on ESPN, he's going wide receiver 33, 57 overall. And again, I think this is in line with where he should be going. He's going to be the guy I think is a little bit safer at the place that he's going at. Calvin Ridley's going to have all that upside theoretically to finish in that range of where you would be drafting DeAndre Hopkins, like a wide receiver 3 with top 10 upside to go along with it. In my auction league, I'm going to be a little bit more interested in Calvin Ridley potentially falling at a price that I would be more willing to pay than going out and getting him in snake draft leagues. And I'll bring up where he's going over here on Fantasy Pros, because there's going to be guys in this range like your Dalton Kincaids and your Zamir Whites, even Tony Pollards, that may have a little bit more. I'd be weighing that safety and that ability to win leagues. So your Kyle Pittses, I might go up and get over Calvin Ridley. He would be on my short list of guys that I think could theoretically have league winning upside at the prices they're going at, which is what I'm getting at. So I would have to weigh a Dalton Kincaid relative, Dalton Kincaid being able to win me a league versus Calvin Ridley. Obviously, Scary Terry, if he's there, I would like Scary Terry also in this range. So he would be on outside of what I would call my list. I'll go over my list here in a few days when I get all this stuff done. But he would be outside of guys that I would be actively targeting in my leagues, but he would be on that short list of guys that I do think is being inappropriately valued relative to their ability to win leagues in this one. And then DeAndre Hopkins over here, and bring him back up again, where he's going at, I generally think he's going to be a safer play at the range that he's going. And it's just going to come down to the same problem with him is who would I be passing up to go get my DeAndre Hopkins shares? So again, Kyle Pitts, I think has league winning upside. Some of the other guys in this area, if you're into Hollywood Brown, maybe has the league winning upside on this one. Some of the other guys that would be going up above him, so if he falls to me in this range, I would be relatively happy, especially if I need to fill out my lineup in that wide receiver 3 type range or wide receiver 2 type range, something along those lines. Do like the picks at the prices that they're going at in general. A couple other things, and I brought this up. They brought in Tyler Boyd from Cincinnati, up to $4.5 million. His contract on Sports Track is going to be at $2.4 million, $1.2 million guaranteed. There's no guarantee that he's actually going to be the number 3 and play in the slot. You're still going to have a first-round draft pick, Treylon Burks, the bust, coming back this year. They re-signed Nick Westbrook-Akine. He was running as basically their wide receiver 2 for most of last year. to go out there. I could definitely see Hopkins playing a lot more slot or having the ability to move Calvin Ridley around the formation, to play like the Z slot instead of like just putting him on the outside. We'll talk about a little bit about this later, but the ability to run a guy in the slot, I think Jamar Chase last year, half the time is going to just increase the amount of opportunities that he has. And I like the ability for guys to get both the higher efficiency type or lower probability snaps on the outside that translate into higher fantasy points. But I also like the ability to just get guys opportunities playing in the slot. So playing DeAndre Hopkins more in the slot, I would really like is that big slot. And then that's going to allow them to move Calvin Ridley around the formation. And the reason why I bring all this up is the guy to actually probably go spend that last round dart throw at is going to be Chig this year. He's going to be going at my tight end 15, especially because of the injury to Juwan Johnson. He's going tight end 21 on Fantasy Pros, 170 overall. On ESPN, he's going down here at 187, tight end 20. And then on Fantasy Pros, he's going tight end 25, 192.6 overall. So one of the things to talk about with Chig is, he's more of a big slot, move position tight end. Bringing this up, last year, 81% of snaps in week 3, 83% of snaps in week 1. He may not be a full-time type of player. It really depends on like how much he's on the field. He has to get up to about 80% snaps for him to really be fantasy relevant. Now, if this is a higher volume passing offense and they're not going to be expecting him to block, he's going to have a lot of fantasy value in this offense. They also have Josh Weil coming back off an injury. He may end up being more of the inline blocking Y. The only other guy I can kind of guess may end up being that guy is Nick Vannett. But if Chig can't get up to about 80% snaps, some of that just general volume isn't going to be there to push him to the next level of being like a fantasy starter. He does probably have like top 10 upside because the things that we're going to be looking for when it comes to Chig, and I can bring this up, that third year tight end with good athletic measurables attached to a high volume passing offense where he's going to be the number 1 or number 2 in the offense. And we can say all those boxes get checked when it comes to Chig, especially when we start thinking about the fact that Calvin Ridley is going to be 29 and DeAndre Hopkins is going to be 32 over the age apex. So now we can tell the story where that third year tight end with good athletic measurables has the road to not just be the number 2, but the number 1 in this offense coming down the line. This is all stuff that I like. So Chig would be up there as a guy that probably should have a dart thrown at him. I do generally like DeAndre Hopkins' value where he's going to return as a push. Calvin Ridley is going to have that like league winning type upside, especially at the prices that he's going at. Again, understand your league, what league that you're going in, that difference between 48 overall, which I probably don't like relative to some of the other guys that would be going in this range. And then Fantasy Pros where he's going at about wide receiver 69 overall. Like I would like this dart throw wide receiver 33 more than 48 overall. And then Will Levis is still, doesn't matter how ugly it is, going to have the ability to win leagues. And then if I had to pick between the two, it would be Tony Pollard. But in general, I think it's going to be a split backfield. And the usage in the touchdown department is probably not going to be there for either one of these guys to really be anything more than like a push wide or running back, low end running back 2. So anyway, that's about all I got. And hopefully I'll be back tomorrow with the Vikings to get this done.